Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Aliens panicked after discovering the secrets of a human warship. The alien research vessel Vori drifted through the silent void, its shimmering hull reflecting the dim light of a distant star. Deep within its core, the greatest scientific minds of the Zeri Dominion had gathered, their tendrils twitching in anticipation. Before them, suspended in a gravity field, was the object of their study, a human warship. The ship, though battle-scared and lifeless, carried an aura of defiance. It had been discovered adrift after a brutal skirmish near the outer rim, its human crew long perished. The Dominion had assumed this was a prime opportunity to dissect and understand the technology of this young upstart species. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, yet their rapid expansion and ruthless efficiency in warfare had begun to unsettle even the most ancient empires. High Scholar Vexen, a veteran of countless studies on primitive species, slithered forward, his secondary eyes flickering over the vessel's scared exterior. A crude design, he mused, his voice vibrating through the chamber. Their reliance on metallic armor and projectile-based weaponry is inefficient. The humans still operate on brute force rather than sophistication. His subordinate, Scholar Tack, ran his scanning tendrils over the ship's surface. And yet, he countered, their crude methods have proven effective. They have pushed back the Illyri swarm, dismantled the Tyrannus war clans, and even fought the mechanized horrors of the Cadi collective to a standstill. There is something more to them than simple brute strength. The scholars continued their analysis, probing deeper into the ship's systems. As expected, they found primitive, yet strangely robust engineering. The humans had designed their ship to function even under extreme conditions. Redundant backups, manual overrides, and weapon systems that could still operate even if half the vessel was torn apart. But it wasn't until they accessed the ship's black box that they realized the true horror of what they were dealing with. The logs began playing, distorted at first, then resolving into clarity. They saw the battle from the crew's perspective, their voices filled with grit and resolve. But what unsettled the Zeri the most wasn't the enemy they were fighting, it was the humans themselves. Shields failing. Hull breach on Deck 3. Keep firing. We die before we surrender. Engineering, reroute power to forward cannons. Give those bastards hell. The alien scholars watched in horror as the crew, despite suffering catastrophic losses, refused to abandon their posts. Even as their ship was being torn apart, they fought with a terrifying, unyielding determination. Then came the final moments. The captain, his face bloodied, his breath ragged, leaned into the terminal. His words were clear, resolute. If this is the end, we'll make it one they never forget. Overload the core. We take them with us. The scholars recoiled in shock. No Zeri captain would ever consider such madness. To destroy oneself to ensure an enemy's defeat. It was unthinkable. The last transmission showed the warship barreling toward the enemy fleet, its engines burning with reckless abandon. The moment before impact, the captain gave a final grin. Then, obliteration. Silence filled the research chamber. Tack's tendrils curled inward, a sign of deep fear. They destroyed themselves just to ensure their enemy did not win. Their survival was secondary to their victory. Vexen's voice trembled. No species fights like this. No species should fight like this. A dreadful realization settled over them. This wasn't an enemy that fought for conquest or dominance. The humans fought as if they had nothing to lose, as if war itself was their natural state. The Zeri Dominion had thought themselves the pinnacle of galactic warfare, but now they understood the truth. Humanity wasn't just another species. Humanity was a nightmare. The scholars stood frozen in stunned silence, the echoes of the human captain's last words still ringing in their minds. A species that fought like this, without hesitation, without mercy, and with absolute commitment to destruction, was unlike anything the Zeri had encountered. The Dominion had faced wars before, conflicts spanning centuries, but always with calculated strategies, retreat options, and diplomatic backdoors. Humanity, it seemed, did not believe in such things. Vexen's tendrils twitched as he turned toward his subordinate. Delete the data. Tack's eyes widened. High Scholar, we must report our findings. No, Vexen snapped, his voice a harsh click of finality. If the Council learns of this, they will see only an opportunity for war. You and I both know what will happen. Tack hesitated. He did know. The Dominion's ruling caste was arrogant, assured of its supremacy. If they saw humanity as a threat, they would strike first. attempting to subjugate the species before it could grow too powerful. But what the High Scholar had just witnessed made it clear that strategy would fail miserably. Then what do we do? Tak asked, his voice uneasy. Vexen exhaled, his frills expanding in deep contemplation. We must make sure our people never provoke them. We must ensure that the Dominion remains an ally of humanity, no matter what it costs. Tak processed this, struggling against his instincts. The Dominion had never bowed to another species. It had never feared another species. But now, looking at the battle logs of a single human warship, fear had rooted itself deep in his mind. He hesitated only a moment before moving to the control panel and wiping the ship's databanks clean. The records of their analysis, the logs, everything erased. The only remaining evidence was the haunted expressions on their faces. In the days that followed, the research vessel Vori returned to the Dominion Central Archives, reporting only that the human ship's technology was unremarkable, its data corrupted beyond salvage. The Council barely paid attention, their focus remaining on the larger political game, on their long-standing rivalries with other empires. No one saw the two scholars' concealed relief as the matter was dismissed without consequence. But Vexen was not done. He called for a meeting with the Dominion's diplomatic corps, an unprecedented request for a scholar of his rank. There, behind closed doors, he made one thing very clear. Under no circumstances should the Zeri Dominion ever engage in open war with humanity. Trade with them, ally with them, give them space, resources, even technology, but never provoke them. The diplomats were perplexed, but did not argue. And so, quietly and without explanation, the Zeri began making small diplomatic overtures to humanity. Trade agreements, non-aggression pacts, cultural exchanges. The humans, though wary, accepted these gestures with curiosity. They did not question why a major galactic power was suddenly eager to avoid hostilities. The Dominion's rivals, however, did not heed the same warnings. The Craxi hierarchy, a war-hardened race of conquerors, saw humanity's rise as an insult to their supremacy. They scoffed at the Zeri's attempts to befriend such a primitive species. When humanity refused to bow, the Craxi declared war. The Zeri watched in silence as the first human fleets deployed, their battle formations tight, their strategies unconventional. They watched as the Craxi sent their warlords forward with arrogance, only for their fleets to vanish, consumed by human ambush tactics and suicidal last stands that left no survivors. They watched as entire Craxi strongholds fell within weeks, their fleets torn apart by human vessels that refused to surrender, soldiers who would rather die than retreat. The war ended in months, a record-shattering defeat. The Craxi surrendered unconditionally. Vexen received the news with a quiet nod. It had played out exactly as he had feared. Text, standing beside him, let out a slow exhale. They didn't just win, he murmured. They erased the enemy's will to fight. Vexen turned away from the war reports, his frills shifting in dark contemplation. This was never a war for humanity, he said. It was practice. The aftermath of the war with the Craxi sent ripples across the galaxy. Species that had once dismissed humanity as a minor nuisance now regarded them with wary eyes. Empires that had spent millennia locked in stalemates suddenly reconsidered their military doctrines. Even the Zeri Dominion, despite its caution, found itself questioning its own strength. Vexen sat in his private chambers, staring at a holographic projection of the conflict's final battle. Human warships, barely holding together, had thrown themselves into the heart of the Craxi command fleet. There was no retreat, no negotiation, just unrelenting violence. It wasn't just warfare. It was personal. Tak entered the chamber, his expression grave. The High Council has convened an emergency session. They want our analysis on the humans' war capabilities. Vexen's tendrils curled. And what did they expect to hear? That we should challenge them. That we should risk our entire species in a war against beings who embrace annihilation. Tak hesitated. They don't see it that way. They still believe the Dominion is superior. They want a plan to ensure our dominance in the future. Vexen let out a slow breath. The arrogance of the ruling caste was staggering. Even with clear evidence of humanity's lethality, they still assumed they could control the outcome of a war. He pulled up a new report, casualty numbers from the Craxi conflict. The numbers for human losses were staggering. By all logic, no species should have been able to sustain such attrition, and yet, they lost entire fleets. Vexen murmured, more to himself than to Tak. They lost millions of soldiers, but they kept fighting. He turned to face his subordinate, his eyes dark with realization. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving the point. Taxfrills trembled. What point? Vexen exhaled sharply. That they will not break. A chime interrupted them. The High Council was ready. The chamber was vast, lined with the finest architectural mastery the Zeri had to offer. The ruling caste sat in their elevated seats, their shimmering robes signifying their station. Vexen and Tax stood before them, the weight of the Dominion's future resting on their words. High Scholar, one of the counselors said, his voice smooth with authority. You have studied the humans extensively. What is your assessment of their military doctrine? Vexen's eyes flickered to the center of the room, where a massive display hovered, showing human fleet movements during the war. He didn't even need to look. He already knew the answer. Their doctrine is simple, he said, his voice measured. Total commitment, victory or death. There is no third option. Murmurs spread through the council. A few scoffed. Surely that is an exaggeration, another counselor said. Every species values self-preservation. It is an evolutionary constant. Vexen's tendrils stiffened. Not for them. He gestured at the hologram. You have all seen the war reports. The humans lost 4 times as many soldiers as the Craxi, yet they never surrendered. Their soldiers kept fighting even when outnumbered, even when hopelessly surrounded. Their ships fought until they were torn apart. He paused, letting the silence sink in before continuing. They do not fear death. If anything, they embrace it. A wave of unease rippled through the council. Even the most seasoned among them seemed disturbed. Another counselor leaned forward, his mandibles clicking. Are you saying we cannot defeat them? Vexen chose his words carefully. I am saying that if we do fight them, we must be prepared for something no empire has ever faced before. He let his gaze drift across the chamber. A war where our enemy does not stop. A war where every battle is fought as if it is their last. A war where they are willing to sacrifice everything just to ensure that we suffer. He stepped forward. We have always prided ourselves on our advanced tactics, our superior strategy. But what happens when we face an enemy that does not care about tactics? What happens when they are willing to hurl themselves into battle with no regard for loss? A tense silence followed. Tact, standing beside him, finally spoke. We cannot fight them, not in the way we have fought others. The Craxi thought brute force would be enough, and now they are extinct. One of the elder counselors narrowed his eyes. Then what do you suggest? Vexen straightened. We make sure humanity sees us as allies. Trade with them, learn from them, give them what they want when it is reasonable to do so. Because if we ever make them see us as enemies, he exhaled, then we will know the true cost of underestimating them. The council chamber was silent. Then slowly, one of the senior counselors nodded. We will take your recommendation under advisement. It was a dismissal, but Vexen knew it was the best outcome he could have hoped for. As he and Tack left the chamber, his subordinate whispered, Do you think they'll listen? Vexen's expression darkened. I don't know. But if they don't, he looked back at the chamber doors, his voice barely above a whisper, then we are already dead. The next few cycles were a blur of quiet but urgent diplomacy. The Zeri Dominion had never been one for subtlety. Yet now, under the surface, its entire approach to humanity was shifting. Trade routes were expanded, diplomatic envoys were dispatched with unusually generous terms. Military tensions along the borders were eased with unexpected cooperation. To the outside observer, it seemed like simple pragmatism, an empire choosing diplomacy over conflict. But Vexen and Tact knew the truth. It was fear. Even so, fear alone could not guarantee survival. Vexen knew the Dominion's leaders were arrogant, and arrogance had a way of leading to reckless decisions. Sooner or later, someone would make a mistake. Someone would forget the lessons of the Craxi, and when that happened, the entire Dominion would burn. Vexen was deep in his research chamber when the news arrived. The encrypted transmission came through official channels, but the moment he saw the file header, he felt his tendrils tighten with dread. Incident report. The Trar border conflict. He barely had time to skim the contents before Tack stormed into the chamber, his frills twitching with panic. They did it, Tack hissed. They provoked them. Vexen's eyes flickered across the report. A Zeri fleet, acting under the orders of an overzealous warlord, had intercepted and fired upon a human convoy in a border sector. The official report claimed it was a misunderstanding. The humans, however, had responded with swift, terrifying precision. The Zeri fleet had been eradicated, not defeated, eradicated. No distress calls, no survivors. Every ship wiped from existence in what human battle doctrine referred to as a preemptive response strike. Humanity didn't issue warnings. They issued finality. We have to stop this before it escalates, Vexen muttered, moving to his console. They already did. Tack interrupted, his voice almost a whisper. They dispatched another fleet to secure the sector. Vexen's body locked in place. That's suicide. Tack swallowed hard. I know. The battle was over before the Zeri fleet even had time to react. The humans had been waiting. The moment the Dominion ships crossed into contested space, the retaliation came not in the form of a diplomatic warning, but in the form of kinetic bombardments that tore through shields as if they were paper. Human ships didn't maneuver for efficiency. They moved with aggression, closing the distance at suicidal speeds, their weapons firing relentlessly, unceasingly. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes. The Dominion fleet ceased to exist. Across the Zeri networks, panic erupted. No one had ever seen warfare conducted with such brutal finality. Even the most hardened military strategists hesitated, unable to comprehend how the humans had turned a simple skirmish into extermination. Then the final message came, a single transmission sent from the human admiral overseeing the engagement. It was short, simple, and devastating. Do not test us again. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a fact. The Zeri Dominion had spent thousands of years asserting its dominance over lesser species. But now, for the first time, they had encountered a species that refused to submit, refused to play by the rules of war and diplomacy that the galaxy had followed for millennia. And worst of all, the humans had not even considered this a war. To them, this was merely a lesson, a reminder, a taste of what would come if the Dominion ever made the mistake of thinking themselves humanity's enemy. In the days that followed, the High Council convened in frantic, secretive meetings. There was no more debate, no more arrogance. They understood now. Humanity was not to be challenged. The Dominion would shift its policies. It would appease. It would accommodate. It would survive. Vexen stood in silence as he read the final declaration from the Council. A non-aggression pact, a full withdrawal from contested space, economic incentives to keep humanity appeased.